Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. My guest today is Eiron Roffey, a seasoned M&A integration leader with deep experience in roll-ups across healthcare, technology, and professional services. Based in Canada, Eiron has led the integration of more than 80 founder-led businesses, helping turn acquisition strategies into scalable platforms. What sets Eiron apart is his people-first approach. He doesn't just think about systems and milestones. He thinks about seller psychology, team readiness, and what it means to lead humans through change. Whether he's guiding a founder through the emotional side of letting go or preparing internal teams to show up with empathy, Eiron brings strategic clarity and a ton of heart. Eiron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So Eiron, let's start out with your story. What drew you into doing M&A integration work, and what's kept you in the game for all these years?
Yeah, so I think like most people that I've heard that are in M&A, I actually fell into it. So my background is in accounting. I started my career working in oil and gas, doing accounting. And what I quickly realized was having a desk job and doing debits and credits just wasn't for me. Luckily, as I realized this, I was recruited by a company called FYI Doctors here in Canada. They're an optometry roll-up. So they had grown very quickly. We're mostly a standalone operation at the start, but then as we grew, we quickly realized we needed to integrate at scale and be all one brand. One of the things I loved about doing this early on was working with owner-operators and their employees. They're, usually very small businesses, very entrepreneurial. And one of the things that kind of was near and dear to my heart was my parents started their own business. Two of my brothers have their own businesses. So that entrepreneurial mindset really hits me. One of the things that keeps me going in the game is that it's always changing. I think from the point when I started 13 years ago to now with, AI, speed of technology, accessibility, I find it's even more challenging now from an emotional aspect because they have access to so many interesting tools that, independent entrepreneurs didn't have 13 years ago that, our platform, whatever company I'm working at now, needs to be so dialed in and explaining to them that, hey, maybe we don't have that piece of technology because you're able to spin up things at a much faster rate than a larger organization. There's a lot of dealing with change management, emotion. And so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I often tell people if you get bored easily, come do M&A.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. You've got that family background of entrepreneurship. My folks owned a couple of businesses when I was growing up, and I never quite thought about that. So that's a real interesting thing. And that's got to help as you think about the personalities and personas of these different folks that are selling their businesses, that are being acquired. So you've done 80 or so founder-led integrations. So how do you navigate these personalities and help them make the integration successful?
Yeah, I would say bucketed different sellers into different personas. So one being, the legacy builder, where it's so important for them that their legacy lives on, their people are so important, their employees are so important, and their customers are so important to them. It's important to honor that legacy and make sure that you build trust that you're going to, do right by them and by their employees and customers. There's other ones that I've dealt with where I call one the burnt out operator, where they're just tired and they're like, I don't want to deal with accounting. Big one is HR, all the HR stuff,
right?
Especially today. It's just so fast that, they're tired. And so they're actually quite easy to work with because, as soon as you can take all of that off of their plate, and especially in healthcare where, they went to school for optometry, dentistry, whatever the case may be, they just want to practice. And so getting all of that off their plate and just helping them do what they love to do is, an awesome reward. You have the business-minded seller who they're really in the weeds on the business side and not necessarily on the delivery side. And so for them, you really have to show up. Your team has to show up really strong and professional so they can, so they feel comfortable that the decision they've made is the right one. Then I call it the family-focused seller, but actually recently I'm kind of toying with the name in my head because it doesn't just apply to family-focused people. So what I mean originally in that one is somebody who needs to exit because they have a situation in their life where they need to either move because of their partner has a new job in another city, but also too, there's people who need to exit the business because I find a lot of independent entrepreneurs now are also involved in other side hustles. Okay. And so they're okay, I've got this other investment that I really need to nurture. So I need to get out of this thing. And so it's basically the person that's ready to exit right away and needs to just detach themselves from the business. And then this is kind of a quirky one where I call it the functional SME, where it's they, have throughout the course of owning this business, let's say it's 20 years or whatever, they've really dialed into one area of the business. A lot of times I find it's marketing where you go in and you're hey, we got to transition your website to our hosting provider or whatever. And they're so against it because that's been they've spent their time studying search engine optimization or, how the website works, how they drive traffic, their brand, whatever the case may be. And they're it's really hard to get them to move. And so you really have to spend time earning their trust to get them there. But I think one of the things, even though there's all these different personas, I think one of the things that ties them all together is they're all very attached to the business. I mean, this has been their baby for, some of them even refer to it as their other child because some of them, these employees or these customers have been with them longer than their own kids. Right. So, they're very passionate about the business. They want trust and transparency because as much as we're buying their business, they're also buying us. I know in your book, you refer to, and I love it, you refer to M&A as kind of buying a house. And I say it's they're buying a house and they're going in and, you kind of find little things wrong as you're going through the house. And it's, it's about being there to support them through those, okay, what's going wrong and help them get through it. So yeah, you just got to earn their trust and you can't make massive change right away. Or if you do, you need to have purpose in doing that stuff. Just acknowledging they're taking a big risk on you. And, that doesn't come lightly. If you can honor that, and honor their legacy, it's going to go a long way.
That's fantastic. As you were going through your list, I was just thinking about deals that I've done. I'm yep, legacy builder. Yep, family emergency requiring an exit. Yep. And so that's a really fantastic list. So you've talked a few times about, the seller motivation, finding their magic number, I believe is how you put it, not just from a financial perspective, but also from that emotional perspective. So what does that really look like?
Yeah. So I find today, actually over the past few years, so I worked in, just to give a little background too, I've worked in on top of optometry, I've worked in the IT MSP space. In the past few years, I've worked in benefits brokerage, roll-up space. And now with LifeMark, I'm working in the chiropractic, physiotherapy, rehab space. In the IT MSP space, I found it came out in it was everywhere, where multiples were the thing. Okay. Everybody talked about multiples, but nobody really talked about the ultimate end value. What are you trying to achieve? And oftentimes too, I find that like when a roll up, we'll call it business development person, comes on the scene, the seller hasn't even really thought about selling. And then they kind of, the wheels start turning. They're like, well, maybe I should sell.
Right.
And it's like, then they get concerned about like, okay, well, what's the multiple? Because I've seen multiples published and that's their measuring stick. But it's like, I think like what sellers really need to do, or business owners in general, is really understand early on, what is their exit? Like, what do they want to do, or what are they going to want to do, and plan for that exit, and plan what's the value they need to do to do whatever it is they want to do. And how you do that is like get a financial advisor or whatever, get them to help you figure out what that value is you need for the next step. And then have a business valuator figure out what's the value in your business, and then identify what that value gap is, and then work towards, whether you have a professional coach. I've seen in the chiropractic space, which is really cool, is there are owner operators that actually have a side hustle where they're coaching other owner operators on how to effectively build the business so they can address that value gap without even knowing it. Like, I've talked to a bunch of them about like, hey, have you heard of like the Exit Planning Institute? And they hadn't heard of it. So I'm like sending links. And I'm like, what you're talking about is exactly what they're talking about. And it's all about like, okay, like making sure that the seller isn't key to the business operating. Like, and what I mean by that is like, if post-close, if they leave, can the business survive without them? And is the revenue that is driving that business not all because of them? So yeah, I think in planning your exit, like you need to think through these things. And then the other thing too is like really have a dialed in plan of what you're going to do post-close. Often what I see too is like for those sellers who, okay, we approached them, they're like, didn't think they wanted to sell. Now they're like, yeah, I'm ready to sell. We acquire them, we start integrating them. I find the ones that don't know what the next phase in their life is are the ones that are really resistant to change, because they're hanging on to what they've always known because they don't know what they're going to do next.
Right.
So I find like it's really important to understand, what value you want, not the multiple, but like what value you need for the next step and what your next step is and what you want to do.
Yeah. What is that future? What am I going to do with myself next?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've got to trust you, Eiron, to take care of their baby, like you mentioned earlier, in order to be able to let go. That's phenomenal. Well, and it sounds like you really are dialed into this change curve, especially for these founders and their founder-led companies. So how do you guide those founders and their teams through this big change? But you also have this mandate to not slow down the integration, right? So they can't resist so much that it slows down what your mission is. But at the same time, you can't be a jerk or they'll storm out and take all this value with them. So what are some of the ways that you manage that balance?
Yeah, I think that it's, number one, it's important to lead with empathy, and also understand their story. So where they came from, why this, and for the seller, why the business is important to them, what drove them to do it. For the individual employees, it's, just understanding what their fears are. And often what I've found is that the fear is really based on the unknown. Like they don't know, especially for employees, this is happening to them. They didn't decide to have this happen. And so really walking them through what the intent is for the business and how long it's going to take for that change. In some situations, it could be just a standalone, nothing's going to happen, guy. Well, we'll never say nothing's going to happen. I know that's the gold standard of no-nos, but things are going to happen in a certain way that, you're going to be informed, you're going to be kept in the loop, you're going to be given an opportunity to provide feedback.
So Eiron, you lead a lot of these founders through change. And so you've got this tough job, right? You're trying to help the founder through their personal change, but at the same time, you're trying to make sure you don't slow the momentum of the integration, right? So you can't be such a jerk that you scare them off, right? Where they leave or they end up stalled so that all that value walks right out the door. How do you balance that need for momentum and integration with that change journey that these founders are on?
Yeah. So I I try to look at it from their perspective and understand what their journey's been to really understand how they're gonna address the change. So yeah, I recently read the Change Cheat Code by Liz Lance, and it really helped simplify, I would say, that change curve and what you need to do. And I think no matter what, people are going to have a reaction to change now, whether it's adverse or happy or whatever. I think it's about going in and spending time with them and really giving them the roadmap of what's going to happen, and when it's going to happen. If you go in with nothing and they're just afraid of the unknown, and so they're going to have an adverse reaction to that. So, I think at the end of the day, the main things that folks are concerned about, when they're acquired, because this is happening to them, not like they didn't have a choice in this. It's like, is my pay going to stay the same? Am I still going to have a job? Am I still going to be able to feed my family? And it's important to address those things right up front. Some other things that come, that are kind of next on the list are like, is my team still going to be there? Is my leadership going to be there? And if you can address those items right off the hop that, for the most part, those are going to stay, it really makes it a lot easier to start implementing those change items in integration. Because a lot of times, I find that like people will, say they don't want to do a thing, but they don't really understand what that thing is or why they don't want to. And that's just resistance because there's an unknown factor that they just don't know. And so they're pushing back. So as soon as you can start, addressing those items, it just really helps with speeding things along.
Eiron, I'm kind of curious. So you talked a few minutes ago about these different personas, right? You've got these different types of founders. And to your point, they lead different employee experiences, right? A legacy builder might have maybe more family members in their practice than somebody who is I think expert operator was one of your other categories.
Yeah.
Do they have different points of change resistance you found? Is there like a template for the types of objections you get, or is it kind of all over the board?
Yeah, like I would give an example. So I was dealing with this one owner operator who, I went in and I was like, okay, here's the program. Well, yeah, so here's the program, and very like resistant. Like he was a legacy builder, didn't want to have any change to the way that the business was operated, was really worried about the employees. And what I found really worked, although it did slightly slow down how I wanted to approach the integration, it was acceptable for the business. But I did little things off the hop that would start earning trust that I wasn't going to break the legacy, whether it was like, I think I started off with like transitioning their insurance, which was like vanilla, boring, nothing to it. And then I worked up to, transitioning the employees on, our contracts, our benefits programs, our, payroll, that went okay. Then I went into systems. Then we did a price increase for customers because he hasn't changed the price in a long time. And as I did all these things, it, built that trust, and then we got through it. I would say that the challenges that I've faced with your kind of expert operator is, you can't make mistakes. And if you do make mistakes, you're sure going to hear about them.
Right.
I've had situations where, we've, not paid an employee, just made the mistake. A number was entered wrong and employee didn't get paid. Well, it was everybody and their brother heard about it,
Right.
So it's just being empathetic, being, falling on the sword. A lot of it for me is falling on the sword,
right?
And just, being that punching bag to take for the team, and just, because sometimes people just want to yell, and you just got to go through it.
I was talking with a young man that I'm mentoring yesterday who's got a deal that is just a train wreck. And he's like, hey, this isn't my fault. And I'm like, hey, man, part of this job, part of being an M&A is sometimes you're pulling things out of the fire. And I don't know how to break it to you, but sometimes when you're the one reaching in to pull it out of the fire, you still get burned. Yeah. And I think we just have to have thick skin in this line of work.
You have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, just to your point there, I think so early on in my career, so it was my first role in M&A. I came from accounting. I had no idea that this was back in like the mid 2010, early to mid 2010s. Okay. And, I had no idea that there was this broader M&A roll-up thing going on. And so, tried to do research on the internet because I want to be the best that I can be, right?
Sure.
Can't find anything, right? So I'm like, okay, and that's part of the reason why, like, I loved FYI, but part of the reason why I left was because I wanted to gain more experience and get better. And so then I went to Deloitte and did consulting, and working with other practitioners that are doing the exact same thing that you're doing was absolutely awesome. It really leveled up the game for me. Like, I developed tools, I developed templates, I developed skill sets. But with Deloitte, like, part of the thing that I was focused on was like mega deal. Mm-hmm. And didn't necessarily love that. And so I went back to working with roll-ups. And at this point, it's like post-COVID. And I find, your group, the M&A Roundtable, and I find M&A Science, and I start connecting with people that are getting interviewed on these things. And that changed the game for me, because, like, this person that you're coaching, maybe not, they may not have others that they're working with in the industry. But when I say industry, I mean like M&A integration as a whole. But it's so awesome to find others that are going through the exact same thing you are.
Yeah.
And it literally is. Like, a lot of times I talk to folks and it's like, okay, you're having the same problem with like harmonizing benefits. You're having the same problem with getting people on your IT systems. And it's, I highly recommend reaching out, going and listening to or attending the M&A Roundtable. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Eiron, I am constantly inspired by the generosity of the M&A community. There's this impression of us as sort of ruthless capitalists, but when you talk to folks that work in the integration space, I find a group of people that has really big hearts.
Yeah.
And so speaking of these really big hearts, you have often said that integration is it's a human sport. So when you're working on deals, when you're taking that human perspective forward, how do you really work with your corp dev teams to help them understand the importance of that human touch? Things like honoring that seller's legacy while you're also building something new. What's your secret sauce for bridging that accounting background that you have, right, where it's all about the pure numbers and this human element?
Yeah, like, when I'll say in generalities here, just not to offend any sort of group, but I'll say, like you said, M&A is often looked at like, oh, it's a numbers game. It's a, big entity that's like snatching up a smaller entity, that sort of thing. But what really needs to be focused on here is that the company you're acquiring, the value that it has is not because of the widgets that it's selling.
Right.
It's because of the people that are doing the service or providing the service or selling the product or whatever. Like, so you really need to focus on them rather than the thing.
Right.
And like, I think when I speak to, whether it's corp dev or functional people, you really got to understand what they're going through, and you really got to understand what their goals are. And, because if you just focus on, the task or the numbers or whatever, you're going to fail. Like, you're just not going to get it done, because these people, at the end of the day, they also have big hearts, and they want to make sure that their customers are taken care of, their coworkers are happy, they're able to see themselves grow in the organization. And so when working with, other individuals in our organization, I'm just like, hey, before you get into it, before you get into like the numbers or the task or the training or whatever, understand who they are, what makes them tick, because that's really going to help you show up with empathy, with, adjust your way of doing things. So, they're brought in, and always explain the why. Like, you've always got to, like, if they don't understand why they're doing a thing or why it's important, you're going to lose them.
As I think about this, Eiron, as I think about the way that we sort of bridge the valuation side, right? The pure finance of M&A into the real value driving that comes out of the integration. I've been talking a lot about this idea of integration debt, right? The idea that you're already on your back foot if you don't do the integration well. If you delay decisions or you make bad decisions for the sake of convenience, you're going to end up paying something. It's going to cost you some money. So have you seen integration debt show up in the roll-up world? Is it something that shows up in your space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we had a call like not that long ago. When you first brought this up on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, this resonates with me. It does, because again, a lot of sellers and their staff are reluctant to change. And if, you have people on the buyer side that aren't versed in, change management and understanding that, like, yeah, there's going to be frustration at the get-go, and that's just part of change. Oftentimes what I see is they'll just stop. Like, they'll stop the integration, they'll stop certain aspects of the integration, delay it, whatever. That number one, it costs money. Like, let's say you're running 2 practice management systems for an extended period of time, that, there's licensing fees and all that kind of stuff associated with that. But there's people's time to manage these extra layers of things, whether it's technology, process, whatever. So understanding that, change and adverse reactions to change are going to happen, I think it's important to make sure that you're not delaying the actions that need to happen to get to a certain point. Also, too, like, one of the other things that I see is integration debt happens in roll-ups because you don't have confidence in the platform.
Okay.
Whether it's, you don't have proper systems in place yet, you don't have proper process, you're kind of figuring things out. And so you'll be like, I don't trust that we can do this well, I'm just going to delay. Well, if that's happening, like, you need to work on the platform.
Okay.
Like, I often even whenever I was consulting at Deloitte, like with startup roll-ups that were just looking to get into the roll-up space, I'm like, look, make sure your platform's solid, make sure your systems are kind of I would say, cover 80% of what the industry might want in whatever industry you're in. So then when you're bolting on businesses, it's easy. So systems need to be dialed. You need to set up your process. One of the things that I find often happens is, like, functions can be wishy-washy. They'll come in hard and heavy-handed, be like, yeah, we're going to do this.
Right.
And then they get pushed back and you're like, oh, okay, well, we can dial that back. And it's like, okay, well, you got to make a decision. Like, it's either yes or no, or something in between that you can live with. But, like, you need to decide on what those things are. Make sure you have an end state determined. Like, what does end state look like, and how long do you want to take to get there? Like, is it negotiable? Is it non-negotiable? Preferably not. I'd say, like, for me, one of the best roll-ups that I've actually worked in was FYI. Like, for, when we started, none of us really had experience working in roll-ups before or doing M&A, but yet we built a stable platform. We still acquired while we were doing it, but they were standalones. And then once we had that platform decided and built, we went and we were like integrating businesses on day one. So, like, they were on our systems, they were on our benefits, they were doing our process, they were all the things. And then we'd shut them down for a week, train them up on everything they needed to know, leave behind someone from the business that we called an M&A manager or M&A coach, and they would spend some time with the clinic post. and then they'd be off running as an FYI location. That was the best outcome. So I often like when people are like, let's just delay for whatever period of time. I'm like, you got to delay with purpose. If there's no purpose, if you're just delaying for the sake of delaying, that's not the best thing to do. Because I've experienced showing that, you can get the job done on day one. Yeah, people are going to be not necessarily totally bought in, but let me tell you, they're going to be more bought in than, having all these delays and ripping off the Band-Aid, over and over again and re-dealing with that change curve every time you have a new change come up over time.
Right. It almost seems like, the whole point of this is to achieve economies of scale, and you can't achieve those economies of scale if you refuse to scale.
Yeah. For roll-ups, I think I've done a bunch of reading on this, but I think gone are the days when, you could just bring a business on and expect multiple arbitrage to kind of create the value for you. Now you really got to do the work of integrating to create that value. And so delaying that is just going to crater the deal.
So I'm curious, when I think about the IMO role in something like this, you've got the deal team out making the deal, and they're having all these conversations with the founders and with perhaps their investors, depending on how that's all taken care of. What's one thing you wish more deal teams would do during that sales process to prepare founders and other important stakeholders for the integration before they toss it over the wall to you?
Well, number one is never say nothing's going to change. That's the first one. But no, I think like going in and giving them a flavor, maybe not the whole story, but a flavor of what that change might be. Because often what I see coming to me, not necessarily in this role, because I'm still, I'm 3 months in, I'm still learning all that there is about the business.
Sure.
But it's almost like it's like the expectation of the seller wasn't that, they were going to have to change the brand or they were going to have to go on our systems or that sort of thing. So it's really about being clear with them about what that is. And also to like making sure that either bring the integration team in earlier, make sure that if you're having conversations with operations, the integration is involved or vice versa. Also to understanding that like, again, back to the, how people absorb information, it may not be a conversation. Have like, whether it's a slide or a Word document or something saying like, here's what the deal thesis is. Here's all the things that we've discussed with the seller. Here's the things that we've promised, and have that as a handover document to the integration team or operations. So then we know like we're starting off on the right foot. Yeah. And I think that's the critical piece here that often is missed in that handover, just not like the sharing of information. Because a lot of companies don't have the tools in place that, like all the VDRs and all these things that are helpful in transitioning information. And they're just going off of like, SharePoint and Excel. And so it's really good to have that handover document.
It's fantastic advice. Well, Eiron, this has been a really great conversation. I just love your insights. I keep going back to the personas. That's going to roll around in my head for a little bit as I'm thinking about my work. So for listeners who want to follow your work or connect, what's the best way for them to follow you or get in touch with you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. So I'm probably the only Eiron Roffey you're going to find. So you can search me out there, or my email is just eironroffey@gmail.com.
Well, that makes that nice and easy. Well, Eiron, we'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Again, a great big thank you for sharing your insights. It was a great chat.
Absolutely. Thanks, Klint. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.